Madam Deputy Speaker.
One moment, ma'am. No. This sitting is resumed, honourable members. When the suspension was taken, we are at order number 11, and to that we shall continue. Number 10. Honourable Member for St. Michael North and the Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am truly honored to be able to lead a government that has brought this policy to the Honourable the House of Assembly for the review of our nation and for creating a better deal for persons living with disabilities in this country. I think you will recall that upon the swearing in of this current cabinet at State House in 2022, I made it absolutely clear that one of the priorities of this government would be, even as we were recovering from a pandemic, would be to start to focus on the terms and conditions and the quality of life of persons living with disabilities. On that occasion, I also shared with the country my own personal interaction, because I was raised effectively not just by my parents, but by my aunt, who is deaf-mute and who has lived with my family from the time my parents got married, and next month will be 60 years. And for a young man to assume responsibility for his wife's sister, to live with them at the age of 25 years old, shows me everything that I need to know about my father and his sense of empathy and his commitment to family. I know firsthand, therefore, the need for respite. I know firsthand the need for someone to be there at all times, because she could never be left alone. I know firsthand what it means to teach children the responsibility of caring from an early stage for someone else in the family who may not be able to do some of the same things that others can do. And when I look around this country, separate from what I know firsthand, I have seen too many examples of it, with parents literally giving their lives to ensure that they are in a position to be able to support their children, to recognize that circumstances vary from family to family, but that in every instance, the absence of an enabling environment and an environment that empowers both them as caregivers as well as their children or charges is one that will make life multiple times more difficult for them. And I start first from the point of view of the parent before I come to the child as an adult. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is therefore urgent that this government and all future governments treat to the agenda that has been laid out here, both in terms of short, medium, and long-term policy initiatives, with the seriousness that it merits and with a clear purpose in mind that the beneficiaries are directly people who do not start from the same position as the majority of adult citizens or children in this country. Their ability to be seen, to be heard, to be felt, to be understood must be central to all that we do. And indeed, with respect to the parents, there are many parents who have had to make difficult choices about whether they can continue to work, about whether, if they work, how they can have arrangements from the extended family be in a position to assist them, as happened with my own circumstances in my family, to make sure that the person who is in need of assistance, that our brother, our sister, our son, our daughter, our aunt, or uncle, are in a position to receive that assistance. And I have known from many parents speaking to me that their greatest concern is what happens to those children as they become adults and as they, as parents, regrettably, are no longer on this earth to tend to them. This is a huge, huge worry and concern to the majority of parents that I know who accept responsibility for taking care of children with disabilities. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we have had as an independent of being able to ensure that there is duty-free access for persons bringing in vehicles that will facilitate the mobility of persons with disabilities. I am happy that we have started the process of ensuring the expansion of vehicular capacity at the National Disabilities Unit. There were previously 3 vans. We have committed to another 2, and today I announce that we must put in place the services for those vans to be available in the evening and weekends readily when persons with disabilities need access to them, because it is not only 8 to 4 or 8 to 5 that those vehicles are needed. And I have already spoken to the minister, and he knows that he will put the arrangements in place to ensure that those vans can be available in the evenings. Similarly, I am happy that we have had 131 ramps constructed at homes of persons who have disabilities. And this is a process that will continue and must always continue, because the truth is that disabilities are not only attained at birth, disabilities happen during the course of life, and therefore there will always be a need for us to meet the needs of those persons who need access to ramps and other facilitating aspects of furniture or adjustments to the household to ensure that there can be dignity for those persons in the home, the place where they spend the majority of their time. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have been able to distribute over 396 wheelchairs and other assistive devices also through the National Disabilities Unit. And these things are things that we will continue to do as a matter of course, because everyone who is facing a disability is not always in a position to meet the needs of what they have to meet in order for dignity to be retained. This government, I certainly, as Prime Minister, am committed to seeing and ensuring the dignity, Madam Deputy Speaker, of every single human being in this country. And Madam Deputy Speaker, you spent a long time working with me, 7 years working with me in the Ministry of Education, where we had to confront a lot of these issues up front. And the record will show that the major piece of teacher retraining that we put in place in EduTech first, before we did anything else, was special needs training for the children of this country. So that this is not a commitment that we are acquiring as a government just recently or overnight. And quite frankly, it's not even about the politics of it, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for supporting the resolution in the way in which he did. Because this country must rise to the challenge of taking care of every one of its own, irrespective of the concerns. The continued provision of prostheses must happen. And indeed, if we can move to work to ensure and see what else can be done to be able to make the lives of those who are seeking prostheses even easier, I want to hear from you, Minister, Minister, in this area. We continue to support the non-governmental organizations that are supporting persons living with disabilities. Why? Because sometimes these NGOs are not sometimes, they are in fact far more nimble than a government could ever be, because a government has a public duty, the government has to account. The Attorney General will tell you that they're constrained by laws, and therefore things take a little longer with a government than they will take with an NGO that may have policies that allow them to respond quickly and nimbly to circumstances and individuals. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Transport has already spoken last week about the fact that we have taken a decision also to secure buses that are dedicated for persons in this area, but equally as important, to make accessible for sustainable mobility normal buses. And the question will be, for us now, the engagement between not just the transport board buses, but the other buses within the system or the other taxis within the system, to ensure that there is equally access at the level of all ranges of buses as far as possible. May not get 100%, but those people who are buying new buses who are privately owned need to remember that there is a client class that also needs to be served, and that if we fail to do so, we are not maintaining our obligations. It may well be that I will await the recommendation of the Honourable Minister, the member for St. Michael South, who, along with the member for St. James North, continue to do excellent work in teeing up the policy programs for the government to take these decisions. I know that previously, ma'am, that you in a previous lifetime too would have done a lot of the work that they are now bringing to fruition with respect to the policies for persons living with disabilities. But I say that I want the policy work done, because a time may come when we may have to regulate within public transport and make a fund available to those who may need to borrow to be able to have all mass public vehicles have some capacity for persons with disabilities. And if it is all, then it means that you can have an equitable burden so that there is not a disproportionate burden carried by any one public service vehicle. But we will not make instant policy on this. We want the Ministry of People Empowerment to meet with the Ministry of Transport and to meet with the transport providers to see how best sustainable mobility can be guaranteed. Because at the end of the day, it is that mobility more and the agency are the two things that most of all are valued with respect to inclusion in this country. Madam Deputy Speaker, similarly, the introduction of sign language as part and parcel of curriculum in schools needs to be addressed, particularly in the primary schools, because that's when children are keen and willing to learn. I don't need to say anything to you about primary school children, Madam Deputy Speaker. You can teach all of us in here and still got more left back in you to give. But the reality is that just as we have someone here interpreting for us today for the members of the audience who technically we are not supposed to see from where I stand, but who I still see regardless, that we need to ensure that more of our children can communicate in this way so that there is seamless interaction. And then secondly, we need to ensure that those kids who are blind all have access to the aids that are needed to ensure that they can have full integration. I want to, as I said, say that I am proud to recognize that our country is evolving in this way. That we had a president of the Senate who was able to distinguish herself by acquitting herself and in the job with utter and absolute distinction should be of credit to all of us. Before her, as President of the Senate, we also had another senator who had issues with his sight. And since then, we have Senator Andrele Boyce, who is also serving. I thought we'll send a Linton first. And so we also have Senator Andrele Boyce now with us, who is carrying the flag in the Senate for persons living with disabilities. That this Parliament has been sensitive to that without it being in a constitution is a signal recognition of where our heads and hearts are as Bajan people across the political divide. And long may that be so. But you heard me say that parents worry about what will happen to their children when they pass. And therefore, we have been discussing, and the minister has not quite settled on the location. But it is important for us to build a respite center and to build a residential facility that can start to accommodate adults living with disabilities who need assisted living. We have already advised the minister that this is a capital project that the government will accept and finance from as early as next year. And we know that he has been completing this year the process towards the Center for Senior Citizens, similar to the Vauxhall and the Seroptimus Village. But the partnership that we want is that when we build these centers, we want to work in concert with the non-governmental organizations who have responsibility and who have chosen these areas with purpose and passion, in the same way that we have worked seamlessly with the Seroptimus and other persons over the years, because we do these things best when we do them collaboratively. And you heard me say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this is not a matter in which governments sometimes are the best, because governments are cumbersome and governments will provide transport 8 to 4 rather than recognizing that people's needs are 24/7. And that is why I'm making the shift, the sea change today, in saying that we can't only meet people where government is, we need to meet people where they are. And that is when government policy becomes absolutely effective. So we will create a village, because we don't want it looking like an institution either. And the assisted living village will then ensure that those who can do a little more for themselves be allowed to do a little more for themselves. And those who can't, well, you will benefit from the support services. The notion that we have to have people go to the psychiatric hospital in order to be able to be taken care of as an adult is not the kind of Barbados that we want. And therefore, we will make that change with the development of that capital project starting in 2025. Similarly, we have to address the issue of legislation. I expect that the legislative framework, which is already prepared in draft, will be laid before the end of this year, and that it will give all persons the opportunity to appreciate that the government is serious about ensuring that the policies that we put in place and the call for non-discrimination for all of our citizens is captured not just by the will and actions of this current government, but will be captured in legislation to govern the behavior and to dictate the kinds of attitudes and values that we expect to see from our people in this country. There is no doubt, excuse me, that we are going to need to have a situation where public sensitization and public education is top. People need to know, even if they've not experienced it themselves, that there needs to be a sensitivity and empathy and a willingness to enable and empower persons who, for whatever reason, may have a disability, ranging from mobility disabilities to cognitive to whatever. And to that extent, Madam Deputy Speaker, I pray that the Minister of Home Affairs, who is in charge of information, will work with all of the NGOs through the National Disabilities Unit to develop a public education program that is designed to sensitize these simple things on TikTok and all the other things. Instead of us watching a lot of the other things that we watch that we don't need to, let us watch things that will aid and improve our sensitivity and our understanding of how we take care of one another. And remember that there, but for the grace of God, goes any of us. And that any of us tomorrow morning can be in the same position that others are in with respect to disabilities. Because, as I said, it is not only people born with disabilities that the policy reaches out to, but people who acquire disabilities. And invariably, the acquisition of a disability as an adult tends to cause even more problems, because the mental adjustment that is needed is not an easy one, and therefore the person is fighting at two levels. Fighting to live with the physical aspects of the disability, but also fighting with the mental adjustment that is necessary in order for them to find their way through life. The reality is that the older an aging society as we are, will always equally have a larger percentage of persons with disabilities. And that is why the government is so clear. And only last week we approved the 2023 to 2030 strategic plan for chronic non-communicable diseases, because this thing is serious. This thing is real serious. Barbados cannot have the level of diabetes that we have and not feel that we have a moral and solemn obligation at the individual and at the family level, at the community level, and at the national level to fight down this thing. There are too many people who have lost limbs as a result of the diabetic condition. There are too many people who have gone blind or have lost their sight, losing their sight, even if they have not lost it fully as a result of the diabetic condition. There are too many people who are now ending up on dialysis as a result. And even though dialysis doesn't have the same limitation of mobility for you with respect to the loss of a limb, it limits your mobility because of the length of time that you have to stay hooked up on a machine, and then the consequential scars and everything else that go with that. And your life is therefore completely compromised, and you are effectively still living with some kind of limitation. So that we have to attack it at source by changing our behavior and not believing that this debate is only about persons who are born with disabilities, but it is also, regrettably, about those who have effectively become disabled as a result of circumstances in life, whether it is an accident or whether it is a condition, as I said, such as diabetes, that has literally catapulted you into that situation. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want our children in primary schools, in pre-primary schools, to embrace the love and innocence that is naturally theirs, and to ensure that they interact in a meaningful way with others who are different from them. Difference does not mean bad or good. It just means different. And the love that comes, particularly from persons who have been challenged in one way, either physically or mentally, is unbelievable. It is almost as if God has given them an abundance to offset for the other things that they have not received, and that we as adults who are able-bodied or children who are able-bodied take a lot for granted and don't recognize that that part of our personality, that ability to love, that ability to emote, that ability to reach out, is really and truly what the New Testament is about, what most religions are about. Love is central to it. And these kids have been blessed, for the most part, with a lot of love in their heart. And the societies in which they live have a duty, in my view, to return that love and that care in every way that we can. The issue of accessibility in public spaces and public buildings, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have indicated, and I've spoken to the Deputy Prime Minister about this before, with sidewalks in our towns, and to the Senior Minister with respect to our buildings. And we have to set ourselves the target that in the next 3 years, that public spaces, main public spaces that people traverse, and major government buildings that are needed for key services, identity cards, passport, etc., the same Parliament, all of us, that we must have 100% commitment to accessibility within 3 years. The audit that is necessary must be completed before March next year. This is not a never, never land or never, never promise. The audit must be completed by the time estimates are approved next year, so that we can include in the estimates an amount that is capable and reasonable to allow us to discharge that responsibility of ensuring that that target can be met within a 3-year period. 2025, 2026, 2027, the end of the financial year 2027 is actually March 31st, 2028. I want, on behalf of the government that I lead, to make that solemn commitment to the people who have had to put up with less than appropriate access in the land of their birth. And it is not, as I said, that all who went before are bad. It is just simply that very often in the sequencing of events, that those things that matter to us are what we prioritize. Well, this matters to this government, and we shall prioritize it, because we feel that in addition to the other things that we've put in place, and that the other things that I've announced today, that those are critical for us to have a better society. We have already announced the non-contributory pension being made available to 6 categories, I believe, of persons with respect to cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, multiple sclerosis, autism, deafness, and blindness. And I thank the member for St. James North again for ensuring that we, along with the member for St. Michael South, that we close the gap with respect to the children with the anomaly that was there after the last announcement. This is only a start. And as this society improves in its capacity to be able to provide for its citizens, I want to ask all honourable members in this chamber to remember to whom we owe our first duty. More often than not, in particular with those born with disabilities, we cannot have them being a victim of circumstance. And I want to pray that the legislation that we bring will be strong enough to commit the country to action and future governments to execute in that action. I would like to say that there will be no further persons with disabilities ever in the world, but we know that we cannot say that. And if we cannot say that, then we need to ensure that the mechanisms that we have are capable always of being able to provide for them. Madam Deputy Speaker, there will be other policy initiatives that we will get into. The Constitution that is going to come will certainly protect the rights from discrimination of all persons with disabilities in this country. And I go further. I believe that the Honourable Attorney General is aware that the Constitution binds the state, but we need also to bind persons in other public access. The Honourable Member for St. Peter brought a non-discrimination bill in the workplace. But it is not only in the workplace, and it is not only the state that may be guilty. So there is still a lacuna for how we treat to discrimination by other private actors within the context of the functioning of this society. And the government is committed to close that gap as well. And then, of course, you heard me say on Friday night, all work and no play is not good. You need a balance. And therefore, the ability to ensure that persons with disabilities can have access to recreational facilities or events or programs, to sporting and leisure events or programs, to cultural events and or programs is critical, because like us, they feel they want to participate and they must be allowed to do so with the full support of the National Cultural Foundation, the National Sports Council, and the National Conservation Commission, seeing them as stakeholders and clients up front in the same way that they see any other grouping within the society. And I give you that assurance. On the matter of disasters, data, data, data. I am now tired of saying it. You cannot prepare for disasters if you don't know who has what, where they are, what they need, how they need to move. In other words, the full profile. And that is why I've said to the Minister that it is critical that we have an awareness program to get all persons living with disabilities to register. Without registration, the government first and foremost cannot know that you are there and try to help you. But secondly, without registration, we can't also understand the policy dynamics and the ecosystem that we must put in place. Because for me to assume and to tell you rather than listen to you is a form of arrogance that should never be associated with any government in serving and servicing those client classes that it must service. And therefore, the fundamental voice that we want to hear is your voice. I heard somebody saying over and over for the last few months, when you vote, you have a voice, and when you exercise your voice, you have power. They may not have used those exact words, but that is effectively what they're saying. And the voice that I need you to exercise is to register and to provide the profile, because the data is what will inform policy, and the data is what will allow us also to help you individually in ways that will make a meaningful difference to your life. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I share these few words and do so with pride. Pride to lead a government that has recognized that while we stabilize this economy, and while we build out the infrastructure necessary to become resilient to a climate crisis, and while we ensure that we do the things to make us clean and green and to protect our land and oceans and all of those things, and while we facilitate small businesses, and while we do all of the other things that help Barbadians seek glory in arts and culture or in thought leadership or in whatever internationally, that if we did all of those things and did not treat to our own who have a disability to allow them to live in dignity, none of those things will matter, because we shall be defined as people who do not see their own and who will have ignored those who need help at the time when they most needed it. And I therefore am proud, as I said, that this Parliament in this year will not only debate this policy, but will have presented before it, laid, even if the debate takes place earlier in the new year, but it could well do this year, a bill that will settle the legal arrangements and obligations, not just for persons with disabilities, but also for others in treating with persons with disabilities. And I want to commend the Honourable Member for St. James North, who has made this not a career calling, but has made this a purpose in his life. And he too has known what it is firsthand to have to develop and to live with that empathy and to treat to his own family in ways that bring distinction and honor, not just to himself and his immediate family, but to his mother, who I worked with for a considerable period of time as Minister of Education, and who we know certainly would have been responsible, along with his father, in instilling those values in him that have allowed him to give back beyond his duty to his practice or his family or his constituents, but to a purpose that will make a meaningful difference in people's lives. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to commend you and the Honourable Member for St. Michael South, because both of you and the member for the City of Bridgetown, when he served in the ministry with the member for St. Michael South, all three of you have known what it is to give and to live with persons in a way that gives them dignity and honor and sees them and respects them. And I do not take for granted, and the member for St. Michael Northwest as well, I do not take for granted what it has taken for this government to get to this point and to be able to bring along as many as we've brought along. And even though we could not do as much as we would have liked in the middle of an IMF program, we are now in a position to continue to do more. And that is why you have heard me make the announcements here today towards the respite center and towards the facility for adults living with disabilities. I've told Kurt that if we can get at least a 40-bedroom respite center, it effectively means that if you give each family a maximum of 2 weeks, it means that we can reach 1,040 families with a 40-bed facility. That is no small achievement in a country this size with a development profile that we have. And I look forward, therefore, to seeing those plans and to having that groundbreaking, but equally to the other suite of measures as we have discussed. So I'm obliged to you, and I thank all who have participated in this debate. I think there are a few others who will speak, but all who have participated thus far, but in particular, the persons who I highlighted in this honourable chamber, the member for St. James North, the member for St. Thomas, the member for the City of Bridgetown, the member for St. Michael Northwest, and of course, the Honourable Minister who has led the charge now of ensuring that these policies do not languish on a shelf somewhere and gather dust, but have been immediately translated into legislative action and indeed into fiscal and other financial benefits for the class of persons who regrettably have had to carry disabilities as a part of their life. I'm obliged to you. Thank you.
I'm a member for St. Joseph.
Deputy Speaker, I propose that we should take our lunch break now. I therefore ask that we suspend this sitting until 2:45. 2:45.
The question is that this honourable chamber be suspended until 2:45, 2:45 p.m. All other members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This honourable chamber is now suspended until 2:45 p.m.